Hello everyone, my name is Miss Sala Abuzaid and today I'm gonna make a summary on Unit 1 and Unit 2 in the Science Year 5, and this unit is gonna be talking about the flowers and the plants. Let's go. In the first part, as we know, there are doctors for human and there are vets for animals. But who are the doctors or the scientists for the plants? So the scientists who study the plants and treat them are called the botanists. The botanists are the scientists who study the plants, their parts, their functions, what kind of soil they need, how they reproduce, and how's this flower red, how's this flower yellow, and all the researches and everything about the plants. The botanists are the ones who do this because they are the scientists responsible about studying the plants. Now going to the flowers. So there are different kinds of flowers. Some of them are super bright, like the hibiscus. Some of them are scented, which means in science, scented in science means in English, smell. Some of the flowers have smell, like the jasmine flower. And some of them are neither bright or scented. They don't have color or smell. And we call this a rice flower. And in order to study more about the plants, we need to dissect them. What is the meaning of dissecting? Like doing this. Taking a flower and dissecting. Taking parts of the flower and studying and knowing each of them. Like here we know this is the leaf, this is the sepal, petal, stem, and so on. So dissecting helps the scientists know more about the nature and the color and the function and everything about the flower. And now talking about the flower. In the flower, we have a female part and a male part. The female and the male doesn't have to be in the same flower. Sometimes there is a flower that has the male part, and the other time there is a flower that has the female part. And sometimes both parts are found in the same flower. So what do we call the male in our flower? We call it a stamen. And if you are confused and sometimes you forget which is which, just remember that the stamen has the word men, and men refers to male. So stamen refers to male. What are the three parts of the male? We have the pollen, and I can remember it with the word pole, as it looks like a ball. So pollen. Also, there is anther. Anther is on the top. Anther. And then we have the filament. The filament is the long, thin stripe. Okay, so we have a string. So we have the filament and the anther, which makes the pollen, and those are the three parts of the male. Going to the female. Remember that girls are not the best drivers, so we're gonna remember it with the car. Remember it with the first part, which is car. Carpel. So the girls, the female part, are gonna be carpel. Gonna be called carpel. Okay. The upper part is gonna be called stigma. And then the skinny part is, I'm gonna remember it with a fashionista or something, that she has style, so she has to be thin and skinny. So remember, this thin part is gonna be called style, because she's a fashionista, she's a female. And then going to the O part, it looks like an O, ovary. So the O part, which looks like an O, is the ovary. And the inside, which makes the seeds later on, is called ovule. So the four parts of the female is stigma. The crown looks like a crown, the stigma. And then going to the style, then going to the ovary, the outer part, and the inner part of the ovary, which makes the seeds, is called the ovule. Okay, what else can we find in a flower? The colored part in the flower, we call it the petal, and the lower part, which is the green part, it's not the leaves. The leaves are on the stem, lower in the stem. But the one beneath the flower right away, we call it sepal. Okay? And then we have the stem and roots and so on in the rest of the flower. Okay, so here we have stamen for men and carpel for the woman, which is the female part. So going over this again, saying the stamen is the male part having the anther and the filament, and the carpel is the stigma, style, and ovary. And the ovary makes the ovules that we already said makes the seeds later on. Okay, so obviously what we were talking about since we started is the flower and the parts of the flower and how it has bright color, how it has scent, sometimes it doesn't have a color or a scent. So are all the plants have flowers? No, they don't. Some plants don't have flowers. And in this case, we will name those plants non-flowering. And from the name, it has no flower, like I said, non-flowering. So what are the types of the non-flowering? We have the conifer, liverworts, mosses, and the fern. Okay, and let's go through it. First of all, this is a bee. Before we go to the non-flowering, you see the yellow stuff looks like Cheetos? This is the pollen. And while the bee is taking from inside what we're gonna know later on, which is the nectar, feeding on something which is the nectar, the pollen is taking to the bee by accident. So just keep in mind this video, so later on while we're talking about the pollination, you will know how did the pollen go from one place to another. Going to the comparison. Over here, we have a comparison between two non-flowering, moss and fern. What are the difference between them? So yeah, both of them, they have no flowers. Okay, that's something in common. What else? Let's see. If we look at the moss over here, it looks like when you leave the bread for a couple of days wet and then there's green stuff on it. So this is the moss. Green stuff which looks very, very small. You can't identify them. Look how small it is. This is called moss. Okay? And then we have something else which is non-flowering, which is called fern. And obviously you saw this a lot in the parks. So let's compare between their leaves. So comparing to the moss, if we compare the fern to the moss, the fern has actually a lot of small leaves and branches, making branches and so on. So it's complex. It's complex. Complex means complicated. There's a lot of leaves. And looking at the moss, it's pretty simple. It's very simple and small. You can even see them. Just like saying it's small, not knowing if it's there or not by seeing it with a microscope or something. Okay, going to something else, easy. The roots. So the moss technically is like grew on rocks, so it doesn't have roots. No roots. Because it's growing on a rock, so it's not going to break the rock and make the roots inside. And it's very small technically, so no roots for the moss. For the fern, no, actually the fern is a big tree. So it has roots, so it can make it fixed and can stand still, because we know the importance of the roots that helps the trees stand upright and doesn't fall. Okay? And there's only one thing left, the stem. Let's talk about the stem. So talking about the stem for the moss, it's going to be very thin and it's simple and it's spiral, looks like a spiral, okay, attached to each other because they are all attached to each other. So technically the stem doesn't exist. It's like very, very small, as if it was like for decoration or something. So the stem doesn't transport water and nutrients. It just looks like stem, small, but it doesn't do anything because it's super small. It doesn't need time to transport. Just like right away, their water, their nutrients, they're gonna absorb it without stem. But over here for the fern, it's a big tree with a trunk. So it has a long and upward from the ground because it's a normal tree. And obviously it will do its own function that we already know, which is transporting nutrients and water. That's what a stem in the normal way will do. And that was the difference between two non-flowering plants. going to something called identification key and classification key. Both of them are the same name and same meaning, I mean. So what is that? Identification key is what we use before knowing a plant. So let's say I'm gonna play a guessing game now, and I have a plant in my head. So I'll let the students think of, what do you think I have in my head? What kind of plant? So there's a lot of things that actually I could think of. So to minimize it and know what actually am I thinking of, first of all, we're gonna say, oh, is it flowering or non-flowering? So yes, according to what I have in my mind, it's flowering. So now we will remove all the thinking of the asking the questions related to the non-flowering. So the next question will be, so is it bright, scented, or doesn't have a smell or scent or color? So yeah, according to the one that I have in my mind, it's bright and it's scented. So now I minimize the number of flowers that could I have in my mind. And then obviously there's various of types of flowers that has a color and a scent, but if we just give you a couple of flowers or pictures, you will identify which am I thinking of. So let's say we will ask another question. What is the color of the flower that has a scent and a bright color? So I say red, so right away you will know that I was thinking from the first time about the rose. So this is how the identification key could help us minimize our thinking and identify the difference between the different materials, animals, or plants, and knowing exactly what am I thinking of, and helps us in our research and so on. Okay, so going to Unit 2, starting with the reproduction. Reproduction in general is for all living organisms. All living organisms reproduce in order we keep living on Earth, because once we stop reproducing, that means there's gonna extinct. Like for example, the dinosaurs, when they stopped reproducing, there's no more dinosaurs to reproduce, so they already vanished. So in order to keep living on Earth and our species to grow more, bigger and bigger, we need to reproduce, make more of our kind. So we have the human, they reproduce daily. What does that help us? The humankind stay alive, they don't extinct. Okay, going to the animals the same thing, they reproduce daily. What if they stopped reproducing? They're gonna be in danger. Like we see the pandas, we see rare frogs, we see rare birds, and so on. So why are they rare? Because there is small amount of them, and they're not breeding anymore, or they're not reproducing, so they're gonna disappear. So, and the same thing for the plants. Plants already reproduce daily. You plant a new plant, it makes the reproduction, and so on. So if you left a flower, after a while we're gonna find the flower became 2, the 2 became 4, and the 4 became 8, and so on. This is called reproduction, and we only find it in the living things. Obviously you can't find reproduction in the non-living things, because if you left one share and you came after a year, you're gonna find it one share. Don't tell me if you have 2 shares they're gonna get children. No, obviously this doesn't happen, because this is non-living. Only living can do this. Going to the flower life cycle. What's a flower life cycle? So technically the flower doesn't come out poof from nowhere. No, there are steps for that. And in order to give life to the flower, we have to have a flower first. So we have a flower, and then after there is a flower, there is a process will happen which is called pollination. And after the pollination, there's something called fertilization. And after fertilization, there's something called the seed development, which actually seems like the baby growing in the mom. And after that, after the baby grows, technically it will go out, right? So this is the seed dispersal, where the seeds come out of the plant because they grew. Because we have to go out of our mom's bellies after we grow. We're not gonna stay inside. So the same thing for the seeds. After they grow, they will go outside, which we call it seed dispersal. And then when they go outside, they will fall on the soil and start growing, which is germination. And of course, it will take some time, which is going to be the growing. And after growing, they're going to make flowers and so on. It's going to keep going on and on and on and on. This is what we call the flower life cycle, which is a series of stages in the growth of living things. And we call it cycle because it keeps happening over and over. You can't stop the process. Once there is a flower grew, there are seeds come out of it and goes on the soil. It will grow again and will make another flower and so on. So this is how you have a huge garden of flowers because of this flower life cycle. So this is how a dandelion is like opening. This is called a dandelion. And okay, this is how it keeps growing until it's open. And we're gonna later on know that this one, its seeds dispersed by the wind, because obviously all of us used to blow this one already. So going to the first step is called pollination. And what is pollination? So the word pollination actually comes from the word pollen. And we already know that the pollen is where the anther of the stamen, the male part, makes. So when I want to explain the meaning of pollination is where the plant gets the pollen from. Where does it get it? It gets it from the anther. You either could say anther or the male part if you want, or the stamen, as if say whatever you want. Just explain that it comes from the male part of the flower. So the pollination is where the pollen from the anther goes to the female part. What is the female part called? It's called stigma, which is the female part. So the pollen, it's like a ball, okay? Where the pollination is the ball the boy has, he kicks it. He kicks it from his place, goes to the male. It goes to the female part, okay? This is how boys do. They like playing soccer, so they're gonna be kicking the balls. So they're kicking the balls from their place to the girl's place. So the pollen transfer from the male part to the stigma, which is the female part. Could be in the same flower if the flower has the male and female part in the same flower, or could go to another flower because sometimes the flower only has the male part and the other flower has the female part. And we call this process pollination. And in this case, when this happens, we call this flower is pollinated. This flower is pollinated, as using it in a verb because pollination is the noun. Okay. So we have the word pollination, pollen. You said pollen is what the anther makes. Pollination is the process where the anther throws the pollen to the stigma. So what's pollinators? It comes from the same word. Pollinators are actually the birds, the mammals, the insects that brush against the pollen accidentally. This is how you saw the bee over here. Accidentally, he is feeding on the flower from the nectar, and the sheath part, which is like this is actually the pollen, is sticking to him while he is feeding on the flower. So this was by accident. He didn't mean it. He was just eating. So accidentally carries it. And when the bee is going from one flower to another, he brushes it against another flower. So that makes the pollen move from one flower to another because of the pollinators. They're not always the pollinators who do this, but those are one of the thingies that help in the pollination. They don't have to be always the pollinators. There are other things that we're going to be talking about that helps also in pollination. But one of them are the pollinators, where they brush against the pollen and accidentally they go to another flower, and the pollen that was sticking on their body was going to stick to the stigma, and then the process will all happen of the pollination. Okay, after finishing the pollination, but before we go to the next step, what would make the pollinators in the first place go to the flower? Like, why don't they go to the trees, go to anything else? Why flowers? Because when you look at the flowers, they're bright colored, they have a pleasant scent, a nice smell, and they have the sugary liquid, which we call nectar. So why would a bee go in the first place, or a bird go on a plant or a flower? Because they're gonna get their food. Okay, what actually food do they get from the flower? There is something which is the sugary liquid in the base of the flower, which we call the nectar. So there is nectar in the flower that attracts the insects, the pollinators, so they go to it and feed on it. So now I just said that the nectar is found in the base of the flower. So how do they reach the inside of the flower? So actually they reach the inside because they have long tongues to drink. So let's see a video and understand more about this. Over here, when you look at the butterfly, it has something sticking out of his head. See this? This is his long tongue, and he's dipping the long tongue inside of the flower to reach the base so he can drink the nectar. Okay? And you see here there's a small ant as well. He went just right away to the base because he doesn't have a long tongue like the butterfly, so he can reach the nectar as well. And if we think about the pollination process, all our food, like 1/3 of all of our food, relies on the pollinators. So in order to get plants and so on, 1/3 of this happens because of the pollinators themselves. So that's a really important process so we can all live, human and animals. Now going to the second step. Going to the second step, which is fertilization. So actually in this step, we're not going to think anymore about the stamen, the male part, or anything, because the process already happened. The pollen landed on the stigma. Is it going to stay outside? No, if it stayed outside, then it could fly by the wind or fall. So it has to dig in and make a tube. So you see here, the pollen, when it fell on the stigma, it made a tube through the style, and the tube went to the ovary, joining the ovary with the ovule. That's it. This is what we call fertilization, where the pollen lands on the stigma, makes a tube through the style, keep going, goes to the ovary, keep going, joins the ovary with the ovule. Voila, you made your fertilization. So the same thing just was said over here. Pollen lands on the stigma, and the pollen grows a tube down to the center of the style, going to the ovary, passing and joining with the ovule. After fertilization, what will happen? The ovary will develop a fruit where seeds grow. So over here there is a seed, and this seed will grow and later on make our fruit. How this happen? Okay, don't you eat any kind of fruits or vegetables? Let's say if you eat a pepper, there are small seeds inside, the white seeds. This is the fruit or the vegetable and has seeds inside, like the process over here. Okay, let's think about something else. An eggplant. The eggplant has seeds inside. A banana has seeds inside. A strawberry has seeds inside. Whatever kind of flower or whatever kind of fruits or vegetables, it has seeds. And this is because of the fertilization. Now, going to the third step, which is really important. It's the process where the mommy keeps the baby inside till it's grown enough and then takes it out. Us like human being. So, in the seed development, where the seed will start growing, there are 3 parts. So first I need the part that keeps it safe from damage, which we call it the seed coat. The seed coat is the part where it protects it from the damage. This small part is called the embryo. What is the meaning of embryo? Embryo means, this is a scientific name, but the actual name is baby. So this is the baby plant, but we call it inside embryo. So you're going to protect the baby with the seed coat, and this is the baby. Where is it going to get the food? All this part, we call it the food supply, so the embryo could feed on it and grow. This is called the seed development. After that, and this is the most important part, is the seed dispersal. What is a seed dispersal? It happens when the fruit is ripe. It's like ready to be eaten. You know, when once the fruit is ready to be eaten, like the tomatoes. You can't eat the tomatoes red. You mean green. You can't eat the tomatoes green. You will wait till they are red. Once they're red, you know that this is ripe. Okay, and also for bananas, but some students said they eat bananas green, but let's say in the naturally way, normal way, we wait till the bananas are yellow. We know that they are ripe, and then we start eating them. When they're green, they're not ripe yet. So once the fruit is ripe and ready to grow into a new plants, the seeds will move away from the parent. Move away, that means they're going to be kicked out. How are they going to be kicked out? Okay, this is what we're going to be talking about in this after this slide. So it could be with the wind. The seeds are going to be taken away from the parents, from the actual plant by the wind. Could be water, could be by rolling, could be by exploding, could be by eaten by animals, and we will understand how, and could be hooks on animals' fur. Let's see, what is this? So I'm going to leave the wind for the end because it has a lot of information. Let's start with the easiest. Carried by water. So water, you see in a lot of videos, there is frogs standing on a green leaf and have a flower on the side. This is called a water lily. So the seeds are carried by water by something called a water lily. Rolling. So in order to roll, this fruit has to be in a round shape. So what is round? To roll, it's a grape. Grapefruit can be round. Explode. We have something called lupin. Lupin is where the plant explodes. I will show you how will it explode. Over here, as we see, this is a lupin. Once he comes near it, it starts to explode. So eaten by animals, how is the seed transferred? So just think, when an animal eats a fruit, after a quiet time, he feels he wants to go to the bathroom. And obviously, in nature, there's no bathroom. So he's just gonna poop somewhere. So the poop carries the seeds. So whatever you eat is gonna come out again from your body, and then it's gonna be going to the nature, and then technically the plants grew from something disgusting. Yeah, and this is like the nutrients for the plant. So that's actually normal. And then we have hooks onto animals' fur. Hooks onto animals' fur. What is the meaning of that? So they are sharp. They have spines. They have spikes. And all of this makes it attach by accident to the animal's fur because they have hooks on it. So this is a kind of seeds that have hooks on it. And if you get confused and you don't remember the name or the examples for the hooks onto animals' fur, just rhyme it with fur. So the example for fur will be burr and burdock. Burr, fur. Burr, fur. So just rhyme it with each other and you're just going to remember it right away. And the last thing is the carrying by the wind. We have 3 types. Gliders, that looks like wings. Like the carried by wind looks like wings. And we call it Javan cucumber seeds. So as you see here, this is called a glider, where this happens with the wind dispersal. And we have a parachute, which is called the sessile fruit, which is very light and fluffy. Because in order to fly by the wind, carried by the wind, it needs to be small and light. The most important thing is being light. So let's see the thistle fruit. This is called a thistle plant or fruit. And as you see, it's very light. And it can fly by the wind. Going to something called shakers, which has an opening at the top and the wind can bend it and make it fall. So it's like popcorn because it's shaker. It's gonna shake. We call it poppy fruit. Now let's see how it looks like. Yeah. You see how it popped outside? This is what a poppy seed looks like. It pops out. And this is the lupin, which we said before. It's the explosion. Explodes. Here's a poppy seed again. It pops outside with any touch. This is the poppy seed before, when you want to grow it in the soil. And after you water it for a while, it starts growing and making more plants. So one fruit had the seed developed inside of it. Once it comes out, it makes dozens of other plants from the same kind, as you see over here. And obviously, the time it takes for a plant to grow, it differs from one plant to another. So don't you think that every time you plant a seed, it will take the same amount of time that the other kind of seed grew in. Over here, the last step, which is germination, where the seed actually starts to grow, as I showed you in the previous video. So in order to grow, it needs water and warmth. It needs water and warmth to grow. That's why in winter, mostly we don't see anything growing because there's not enough sun. But when it comes to spring, it's warm. Okay, and there's water, so it starts. The flower starts to bloom, and everything starts to grow because it starts. Because it's already spring and it's warm. And while germination, because most of the information we know about plants that it needs sunlight, water, and nutrients in order to grow. But in the germination, when the seed is under the ground, actually it doesn't need light. So in the germination process, you don't need light. In the germination process, you don't need light because the seed is buried under the soil. It's under the ground. So how is the light gonna reach it? Yeah, once it grows outside of the germinates and grows upper the soil, it will start to need, obviously sunlight. But when it's under the ground, the most important thing is having warmth and water. What is the germination rate? So different percentages of all seeds planted will germinate. Okay, so the germination rate is when you have a couple of seeds. Let's say you have 10 seeds. So growing 10 seeds in the soil doesn't mean that you will have 10 plants. Some of them will not grow. So there is a percentage, like scientists and the botanists think of it as like, oh, so if we have 10 seeds, the percentage of growing, how much? So let's say 25 will die and 75 will survive. So there are percentages. So you don't think like if you have one seed and you plant it in a pot with soil and you water it every day, and after a while you find it didn't grow, so you say, oh, I am a failure. Maybe the seed that you took wasn't alive, it was dead. So when you start growing, when you start gardening, you want to plant a plant, you have to have more than one seed, because there is percentages. Because it doesn't mean because you have a seed that means it can grow. Sometimes there are dead seeds. So before planting any plant, you have to have more than one seed. So in order to understand how germination can be affected and what can make it not grow or so on, the temperature affects it. One of the main things is temperature. So temperature affects the germination. So how could the temperature affect it? Because we already said in winter it's difficult to grow plants. So the temperature could affect the germination rate, affect the percentage, because if you are planting something in the winter and it's cold, so it's not gonna grow, and it's gonna take a very long time, it's not gonna be good. So all of this is affected by the temperature. What else can be affected by the temperature? The germination time. Because if I'm growing it in the spring, maybe it will take the normal time. Let's say it will take like we saw right now, the poppy seeds, it took 15 days to grow and make an actual stem. But if I grew the poppy seeds in the winter, the temperature is cold, it will take a longer time. So don't tell me, oh, because these seeds are bad. No, not because they're bad, because you grew them in the wrong timing and it was supposed to be in the warmth. So this is the life cycle of the flower, as we talked about already. And this is the flowers blooming. And when are they blooming? They're blooming in the warmth temperature in the spring, in the summer, because all the things they need to actually grow and open, it's there. And when you look over here in this flower, you can find the stigma and style. So this is the carpel, and all of those parts are the male parts. So we can say in this flower we find both male and female in the same flower. And this is another video for the birds eating from the seeds. And this is a sunflower, and we know already that sunflower makes sunflower seeds. Feel free to ask any questions in the comments below, and I will answer them as soon as possible. Have a nice day.